Thank you so much for being here with us, Stacey.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Absolutely. So let's dive into gardening, and what in the world does this have to do with healthy aging?
That's such a good question. Turns out it has quite a bit to do with healthy aging. So there's been a lot of studies. I don't know if you've seen the articles in usually the article shows up in the UK journals, and it talks about one of the things that people have in common who live beyond 100 years and who are living healthy lives. One of the things they share in common is gardening.
Mm,
And my interpretation of this is that gardening helps us in so many ways. And so if you think about healthy aging and you think about what it means moving, it means eating well, it means probably connecting to your spirit and your joy of life. And gardening does all of those things, right? So just the fact of getting outside, moving your body, picking some fresh food, that's what essentially healthy aging looks like. And then on top of that, I think there's something deeper here, which is an appreciation of what health is. So when you're gardening, this is one of the things that I love about gardening. So I have such an appreciation for the sun, the soil, the plants, and they are my biggest teachers in life. And one of the things they teach me is that when you focus on health, you get a really healthy, thriving garden. And if you, for some odd chance, decide that you want to focus more on pests, diseases, and weeds,
mm,
guess what shows up in your garden?
right.
So there's this really interesting psychological benefit of gardening, which is that you're focused on health. You're
Mm,
basically watching your plants for cues for their health, and you're giving them what they need for their healthy lives. And then as a result, you're focused on your health as well. It's a different lens to take. It's like, how can I love and appreciate and support more health in my life? How can I love myself so deeply that this is just a natural part of my existence? So I
mm.
think that's why so many people beyond the age of 100 are gardening.
Beautiful. I love that. That's all just amazing. My mom, who actually, she lives in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I was raised. And I just helped her a couple of weeks ago move into her new retirement community. And the one thing that the one major thing that she's giving up is her garden. And she had this gigantic, like huge garden for my entire life. But however, she has already gotten her planters that are going to go on her deck. And so she has her whole, layout of how she's going to have her garden on her patio area. And it's just going to be pots, and she's going to make it happen, because it's such a huge thing for her, such a huge part of her life. So,
And that's a huge lesson right there, is that it can look like anything you want.
mm-hmm.
It doesn't, when I say you get outside and you have some physical activity, maybe it's inside, maybe it's a smaller area, but just the fact that you're moving and doing it and appreciating the food at
Mm-hmm.
any scale, it's worthwhile, right? So
Right. Oh yeah.
that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is. It definitely is. So let's talk about, obviously, growing your own food is your forte. So what do our viewers need if they want to get started doing this? What do they need to get started growing their own food?
Yeah, so I know this is the Healthy Aging Summit, so probably people coming here are like, why are we talking about gardening all of a sudden? So I'm just going to start from this really simple basics here.
Okay.
I've taught people from all around the world how to grow food. I've taught hundreds of thousands of people from 6 different continents. I'm still waiting for somebody from Antarctica to show up. So if you're in
Excellent.
Antarctica, I'm your person. And so what I want to say is that you can grow food wherever you are. So when you think about it, there are as many ways to grow food as there are cultures on this planet. I mean, think about all the cuisines and all of the ways that over the years, these cuisines have defined what our culture is. And what really is that? That's really the plants that are available in your local area. The plants that people are growing, that becomes the local cuisine.
Mm-hmm.
And so wherever you are, there are plants that are going to be easier to grow and some that are going to be harder to grow. Like if you're in New York, yeah, it's going to be harder to grow a banana. Can you do it? You can. It's just going to be a little bit harder. So
Right.
most of what people need to grow food is an awesome attitude.
Mhm.
Like, I'm excited about this, right? And curiosity about what can grow in their area. And A mentor, I would recommend highly getting a mentor, because that's really going to help you when you're trying to figure this stuff out and things aren't going as planned. A mentor can say, oh, let me help guide you on that path, right? And then once you have that attitude, it gets so much easier. And at that point, the plants, what they want is essentially sun, and that can be outdoor sun or it can be indoor grow lamps. You can do either. And they need something to grow in, some sort of medium. That would be your soil outdoors or some sort of growing medium indoors. And then they need some love and attention, some water and some of your attention. And it really doesn't take that much time if you want to start a small garden. I garden in just minutes each week. And I do that very purposefully. I grow very specific plants that I have a busy life. And all I really want is a lot of greens and some tomatoes. And so I just keep it super simple. So wherever you are, you have the resources. It's really the attitude of, okay, I got this. I'm excited. I'm curious. And maybe look at your first year, 1 to 3 things that you want to grow, just so you can focus your energy, because it's so easy in gardening. If you think about the biodiversity of everything you could grow, I mean, just tomatoes alone, there's hundreds of varieties. So really narrowing down to a couple things and being curious about how to help those plants thrive.
Mm-hmm. So your random question, what's some of the most unusual things that you've grown?
Yeah. Well, I am blessed right now. So when I was in New York City and Brooklyn, I was growing indoors in the winter. So I was growing all my greens indoors in the winter when it was cold outside. And what I loved was the Japanese greens. I love, they have all these different varieties, and they have some that are called kamatsuna. They have like a wasabi mustard green, and these things have really beautiful flavors. And also in Brooklyn, one of the things I loved growing that people hadn't heard a lot about was this plant called sorrel, and it's a perennial, and it's a green, and it has a lemony flavor. So now you have in a garden, if you're just growing greens, now you could have a lot of bitters and you could have some lemon flavor greens. And so you can kind of put all those things together and create a really interesting salad. Out here in San Diego, now where I live, I can grow pretty much whatever I want. I've got like ginger and turmeric and bananas and all kinds of things growing, avocados and lemons, and some places you have a little bit more of a spectrum to grow easily. But even in Brooklyn, I was still growing kind of out there things that nobody had heard about that were really delicious.
Mm-hmm. So like in Brooklyn, is it like for people living in like a city kind of setting, an urban life setting, if they do grow inside, where does one grow their stuff inside? In a closet? Are you in like the living room, or how does that work? Or could it be anywhere?
Well, keep in mind that your grow lamps, if you're growing indoors, so the sun, when you're outside, plants only need like 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And I should say, all of everything I've said so far, I've been talking a lot about vegetables. And so outdoors, they need like 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And indoors with grow lamps, you would think they just need 6 to 8 hours of grow lamp, but they don't. They actually need more like 16 hours. So the one thing about growing indoors is I just recommend shelving anywhere. Like I have shelves behind me, you could put lamps in there and grow.
Mm-hmm.
But I would recommend growing somewhere where 16 hours of bright light is going to be okay. So it's, like daylight light. So when I lived in Brooklyn, I had a studio apartment, and I slept those 8 hours. So 16 hours was the lights were on, 8 hours the lights were off, and the lights were all around me. And when the lights went off, it was time to go to bed, because I knew I had 8 hours before they came back on.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah. So
you could grow them anywhere. A couple things grow on windowsills, but most things need lights. So you probably want some sort of shelving.
Mm-hmm. So for people watching who are perhaps amateurs and they're watching because they want to have the experience of healthy aging, and this is inspiring to them, what can one expect to accomplish if they're just getting started? Like, to not obviously beat themselves up if they're not, creating this extravagant garden, but what can they expect to, create first time around?
Yeah. And like I said earlier, I would recommend your first time around picking just a couple things you want to grow. And your first time around, what I would recommend expecting is a lot of fun lessons because, here's the thing about plants. There's a cycle of plants, right? And there's a seed and you plant it and it grows, and maybe you harvest it and eat it, or maybe it's a plant, it grows a tomato and then the plant dies. There's a cycle of life to these plants, and they have a language that is all their own. And so you can't expect, the same way that, you wouldn't pick up a violin and be like, okay, now I'm going to play this music by Beethoven. You can't expect that just because you've seen plants grow or you've eaten plants before that you know everything about how they're going to grow and that you can expect everything that's going to happen. Every plant's a little bit nuanced, right? And so that first year, I would say the easiest plants to work with are some greens.
Mm-hmm.
They're the easiest plants to work with. And so what you can expect is getting a little bit of tasty food, and you'll get some lessons. Just watch them and see, okay, what happens when this happens? What happens when I do this? And note those lessons down. I would recommend having a little journal so that the next time you do it, it's easier. And so I think sometimes people, they have a grandiose plan, like, oh, I want a garden and now I'm going to transform my entire backyard into a garden. And I would say, start at a scale that you're comfortable that if everything died, you'd still be happy.
Right.
I would say, like, if you have a goal, you want to make sure that you set yourself up for success. And the way to set yourself up for success is that the goal is the journey. The goal is not the exact outcome that you want. You're pointing towards that outcome, but just be okay that if everything goes badly, that you still love the process. So that's one of the expectations I would go into my first year with.
I love that. And that ties back into gardening obviously being so important and amazing for healthy aging, because it seems like it keeps our minds fluid and loose and willing to make a mistake and try something new and be creative, like all those different things that can go into it.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing that I realized. The first time that you eat your own food that you grew, you're going to be like, this is the best food in the world. I've never tasted anything like this before in my life. And so that's another thing that I would say to expect, because you're going to grow a basil plant. You're going to grow something like an herb, something that's simple, that is easy to grow. I would recommend any herbs. And when you eat that, your mind is going to be blown. Your taste buds are going to be blown wide open. So that's another thing to expect, is it's not going to taste like what it tastes like at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, completely different. I know in my years of being a kid and getting to help my mom in the garden, I think some of the biggest things that were different was the broccoli. I remember that, like the taste is completely different. It's such a different, oh my God, it's so much richer and just, oh my, totally different than what I would buy from the store, and like other kinds of greens and things like that. Totally different experience. So it's a lot of fun to
Yeah.
be able to do that. So what about like mistakes that beginner gardeners make? Anything you could shed light on there for people who are just getting started?
Yeah, and this is going to sound really funny, but we talked a little bit about the mindset of growing. But after working with hundreds of thousands of people from all around the world, I think stress is actually the number one mistake that beginning gardeners make, is that they stress too much. They watch the plants. It's good to watch the plants and see what's going on, but they worry when something goes wrong, and they stress out when things are dying. And, so when I first started gardening, I realized that one of the biggest benefits of gardening was that I had this like inner wild child that got let loose when I started growing food. And when I focused on that wild child and I was out there having fun, I was barefoot in the garden, and I was like appreciating the sun and the soil, and I was like, what is this? This is so cool. And that sort of mentality, everything thrived. It's like it's the plants can feel your love. And actually there's been tests where they've put trays of greens out, and they said, okay, we're going to have hundreds of people focus love and attention on these, and these nothing. And these grew faster while the plants were under the same conditions, the same amount of light, the same amount of water, the same growing conditions. The ones with the love grew more. So
Right.
So just the idea of your garden becoming a place of stress, because we want the production, right? Like we want X number of tomatoes to come out of the garden, we start to stress about, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? And I think what happens then is like, that's also the thing that ages us is stress. So
Mhm.
yeah. So for me, that mentality is so important. And when I see people stressing, um, I basically ask them to kind of back off, that there's got to be an easier way. There's got to be a simpler way. And that the outcome is also the feeling of it.
Yeah, no, I love that. That makes me think of, right, like if you ever got into the mindset of, oh, I have to go out and water my garden, or I have to go, or I should go, or whatever, maybe, yeah, maybe it's too much. Maybe you need to scale back, because the mindset is, yeah. And then also I'm thinking, right, like I do not know anything in the world of like scientific research proving such a thing, but right, if we're stressed when we're gardening and putting that stress energy into that plant, and then it ends up actually growing into something, and then we're eating it, how different is it health wise, based on the fact that there was stress going into it, and then we're eating something that might have not turned out as good as if we were putting love into it.
And totally valid question. I would love to be able to do that test.
Yeah, right, that would be like totally amazing. And I guess going back to like longevity, in the beginning you mentioned something about the UK, was it UK studies or
Yeah.
something related to that? So could you share, I guess, shed a little bit more light on that in the world of healthy aging? So there's many different things that gardening can provide, and one of them being like longevity, longer years, and anything else to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, the folks that have done that study, they've written a lot about it to try to figure out like what is it about the gardening, and mm, you know what? Can I ask you to clarify your question?
I guess I would just like to get a little bit more information about how gardening helps with healthy aging, specifically longevity, right? Like what is it, right? We have, you talked briefly like about exercise and psychology, even like I guess spiritual connection, all those things. I'm just trying to get a little better understanding of it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So and this is going to be me hypothesizing a little bit, because this is my experience of gardening, and there's been a lot of research and a lot of people wondering the same question. And I think there's multiple facets of this. So when I think about aging and I think about plants, here's the interesting thing that happens is, uh, well, let me back up one step. So in the longevity realm, we know that healthy food is one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves, right? These are the nutrients that we're putting into our bodies. This is the fuel for our mind, body, and soul. So when you think about your plants, your nourishment specifically comes from the seed of wherever that plant came from. So I'll give you a little example here. So we think of our nutrients like, oh, I want to get some magnesium, or I want to get some, B12, or whatever the nutrient is that I need in my diet. And in reality, all of those things are in nature, and the vehicle with which we're getting them is plants, essentially. So in the plant world, it's photosynthesis is amazing. Soil is
Mhm.
amazing. So most people don't realize that the root systems of plants are actually porous, like mouths, and microorganisms actually go in and deliver nutrients to the plants, and they get sugars from the plant and they exit back out, and it's a big looping system. So
Mhm.
there's all this life in the soil that delivers nutrients to these plants, and then those are the exact nutrients that we need to thrive. And I think there's something about when you become a part of that process and you become aware of where your nutrients are coming from, there is such an appreciation of your health, and you want to do more of it, and you want to give it to your family. You want to provide fresh food for your partner so that they can nourish their mind, body, and spirit. And there's actually foods, specific nutrients that are good for brain function. So when you think about aging and you think about nourishing the thing that fuels our thoughts, and our thoughts turn into actions, if we're fueling that with the right nutrients and the right foods, and we're um, uh, what's the word for it? We are The word for it.
Metabolizing or
No, no, no. We're like we're like patted on the back. We're patted on the back for doing the exact thing that makes us healthy.
right.
So it's a feedback loop of
Mhm.
joy and appreciation where every time we feed ourselves these things, we feel better. And then
Right.
when we go out in the garden, we remember what it's like to eat those foods, and it just is a never ending cycle.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think when when you think about healthy aging, oftentimes you'll see people who, when their purpose seems to fall away, they seem to lose their vitality. And I
Mhm.
think the garden gives us another purpose, which is to nourish ourselves, to nourish our bodies, and nourish our loved ones. And the other thing that's in here is nourishing our kids and our grandkids. So this is a wisdom that gets passed down from generation to generation. This is a tradition. Culture is a tradition. Food is one of the biggest traditions in culture. And through gardening, we're basically reinforcing all of those cultural traditions. And so I think that pride that people have in those traditions and taking care of future generations, I think that provides a kind of longevity where we know that no matter where we are, we're gifting the future generations, and that feels great.
I love it. Thank you. That was perfect. I just like tying it all together and like just yeah, it's the process, it's the journey, not the destination, and all the different many benefits that we can all reap in our own healthy aging lives. But yeah, the future generations too. Because I will say I've always taken so much from my mom's passion to gardening, and all the memories of being barefoot in the garden, like you said, picking peas, and like that stuff is always there. And when my partner Ike and I and his daughters, my stepdaughters, would go over there, and it'd be pumpkin season, right? And getting out there and rolling the big gigantic pumpkins out to carve them, like that stuff is, yeah, that sticks with me at least. And
Yeah. I'm a child of my mom's garden. So I was a, free range child in the 70s. I was like you, I was barefoot picking peas in the garden. And, that was my place of joy. Was like, I don't think the peas actually ever made it into the kitchen because I was
uh-huh.
straight off the vine into the
Yep.
mouth.
Exactly. Oh yeah, same here. Yeah, it was a miracle if we actually got the peas into the house and were shelling them or whatever. That often did not happen. But so actually, could you tell a little bit more, like how did you, that's your childhood, but how did you get into doing the work that you do today?
Yeah, I kind of took the long way around. I was an engineer and an architect, and I loved what I did. I had a great life. And one day I looked around and I thought, wow, I just feel like a tourist in my life. Like these are all things that I wanted to do. I was designing libraries and churches and all these wonderful buildings. And I looked at my life and I said, but if I designed my life, what would I design differently? And I was going to the farmer's market every week, and just this one farmer was selling carrots with like dirt on them. And they were the most ridiculously sweet carrots I've eaten in a long time. They reminded me of my childhood. And
Mhm.
I just remember sitting there eating these carrots and being like, I gotta go back to growing food. This is crazy. And at the time I was 30 something living in Brooklyn, and I had no yard. I had a studio apartment,
Yeah.
and I just decided no matter what, I'm going to do this. And that's when I started the indoor garden. And then eventually I found somebody else's property to grow land, to grow food. So I didn't even own the land that I was growing food on. But it was that high of a priority that I was like, I have to do this for myself. This feels right.
Mhm. Mm. And now, years later, you're right.
Yeah.
Become
And then
become a major
and
career.
yeah, it's just like we started so many farms in Brooklyn. We helped tons of youth grow food, and then I just said, at some point I was like, we got to get online and help people because this is the way to reach a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for helping us to spread the word.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing. And I guess one last question before we talk about a free gift you have for everybody, and also your programs and courses. Like, so let's say someone, right, we've covered people who are, right, beginners, they haven't even been gardened before, and like what could they look for in getting started? But what about people who are watching right now who have gardened, perhaps they've had failures in the past, and they have a little bit of reservations around it? Any insights for them?
Yeah, sure. So I hear this all the time. People will come up to me and they've seen my videos online and they say, "Oh my gosh, I love what you're doing, but I have a brown thumb, and oh my gosh, I'm so ashamed of my garden. It's a mess. I've killed so many plants." So the first thing I want to tell you is, like, you're not alone. Like,
Mhm.
this is how we all feel. We always feel like there's something we could be doing better. We're just wired that way as humans, right? We're like, we didn't get it. What can we do better? So you're not alone, first of all. And then usually people are pretty confused by my next response, because they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I've killed so many plants." And I'll say, "That's awesome." And so they're pretty confused by that response until I explain, which is that, when you think about the biggest difference between, let's say, me, somebody who's been gardening for years, who you would look outside and you would say, "Wow, she's got a really successful garden." Somebody like me and somebody who maybe tried and then gave up. The only difference between us is that I've killed more plants. It's like
Mhm.
the only difference.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, I'm like, get on out there and kill more plants, because
Yeah.
it really is part of the cycle. Especially if you're growing vegetables, these are plants that have annual cycles, and they get seeded, they grow, and then you either harvest them or they die back, and you plant them again the next year.
Mhm.
And so there is a cycle to get to know, and the way to get to know it is you've got to kill some plants in order to
Mhm.
really understand how it is that plants also thrive.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I would say you're not alone, and we're here for you.
Mhm. I love it.
And there's lots of mentors online as well. There's myself, and there's a whole network of mentors. This is the beautiful thing about garden traditions, is there's so many people growing food around the world, and everybody loves helping, because this is a beautiful art. And and so whether or not you resonate with what I teach, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a mentor that you resonate with, and when you do, it's gonna all fall into place. So I highly recommend, just know you're not alone, and that's part of the process, and keep looking for people who can guide you through that.
I know it makes me think of just like success in general in life, and whatever you're looking to succeed at, right? The more no's you get leads to the next yes, right? You're going to get a lot of no's along the way for whatever it is that you're doing, and then you get a yes, but you got to get through the no's are going to be there. It's just
Yeah.
part of the journey. So yes, the dead plants will be there. It's part of growing like successful plants. So
And the coolest part is that most of the time when plants die, you're eating them. So it's like,
right.
I'm
Right.
like, well, you should harvest them and eat them. That's like, that's hard.
Mhm. Right,
That's
there you go. I know that you have a free ebook for everyone, and you also have a program coming up. So everyone, there's a couple buttons below this video that lead you to those two things. So could you tell us what those are?
Sure. So one of them is a free gift for your audience, and it's basically Grow Your Own Greens, and it walks you through 5 ways to put the most nutrient-rich organic greens on your plate. So like I said earlier, one of the things that is always listed as one of the most nutritious foods are greens, and they lump them all together like they're all the same, but there's different varieties of greens. And so there are sprouts and microgreens and braising greens, and so there's and also shoots. And so there is a free gift for you, which talks about the difference between those greens and a quick guide to how to grow those 5 different greens.
Mm,
All right. So
yum.
that's for people getting started, and also for people who have some experience and maybe they've never thought of ramping up their production of those little microgreens. So that's a really great guide for those folks. So I highly recommend you check that out. And then the second thing is that I've mentioned that I help hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world. And I have a course called Grow Your Own Vegetables. And essentially, it is my entire system. I call it the circle of awesome. Everything in nature is cyclical. And so the Grow Your Own Vegetables teaches you everything you need to know from the beginning to the end of growing vegetables and herbs, if that's what you're interested in growing. It doesn't cover things like fruit trees and fruit bushes, so vegetables and herbs. And I call it the circle of awesome because it really is a step by step. Whenever you're growing food, there at each season is an opportunity to learn even more. And so each season you're walking through a cycle of exercises. And that's exactly what we do throughout the course is we walk you through and we help you with any questions that you have.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you. Circle of awesome. Speaking of awesome, right? That's great. I love that. So again, everyone, there's the 2 buttons below that leads over to Stacey's, that free ebook about the greens, and then that program. So thank you so much for both of those things. And are there any last insights? Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess my last insight would be that, man, this is one of those things in my world that I wouldn't change anything for. So if you're considering gardening, imagine something in your life. I mean, toothbrush, brushing your teeth is not the right thing, because I don't walk in the bathroom and be like, oh my God, I'm so happy I'm brushing my teeth. This is so amazing. But it happens to be a part of my everyday world. But
Mm-hmm.
gardening is one of those things that in my world, no matter where I am, I'm gardening. So this is something that when I walk down the street, I notice what plants are fruiting. Uh, I notice everything about an area because of this work that I do. I enjoy my food so much because it tastes so great, and I'm so proud of it. And even when I go to my parents' house, they might just be growing a couple herbs, and gives me so much joy in this world. So in my world, there's very few things that bring me this level of pleasure, and gardening is something that I can take with me everywhere I go. It's something I can appreciate. It's something I eat. If I have a week somewhere vacationing, I will grow shoots.
Oh,
So
awesome.
you can do this wherever you are, whenever you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I highly recommend trying it out. And the Grow Your Own Greens is a great way to do that e-guide, because it'll show you how to tap into this process in a really short time frame, just a couple days, and you could be growing some shoots or some sprouts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my biggest offering, is that you really can do this wherever you are.
I love it. Thank you. I love that. And I love that. I think of like trees. One of the things that I always notice is trees. I'm a big lover of trees, and I really don't even know that much about them, but where I go, I'm like, oh my God, I want to learn about that tree and this tree. You know, there's a crepe myrtle and there's a magnolia. And it's a great joy of feeling connected to everything. So I love
Yeah. Oh,
that.
so much joy in this process.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Stacey. This has been a joy and just so delightful to talk to you. And thank you for sharing your passion and your life work with us. And everyone, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up for yourself on this healthy aging journey. And we will see you again soon.